Hello, everybody. I'm sure almost all of you know me. For the few who may not, I'm Rick Ackermans. I'm an engineering director here at Turner Broadcasting for Turner Entertainment Networks. I've been with Turner for 26 years now and done lots of very creative and fun things over the years. What we ended up having to do, necessity is the mother of invention. And as some of you probably heard, we had some financial tightening here last year. And they decided that they wanted to try to save some money on the production of the Ryder Cup, for which we have the streaming rights, the internet rights. We didn't have the broadcast right. The broadcast was done by the Golf Channel and NBC, but we had the internet and the streaming rights. So in the past, when we've done it, we've produced it as we have any other TV show. We've treated it. We've sent a truck. We've sent crews out there, graphics, all that stuff. And we treat it as if it was a television broadcast, even though ultimately it ends up on the internet. Well, this time around, we were told, okay, let's see what we can do to rein some of these costs in. And so they decided to say, well, let's bring the production back here. Rather than sending well over 100 people out to Scotland, can we bring it back here? The problem is when you're doing events like Ryder Cup, where your first mile is captive, in this case, everything is totally captive to BT. The cost for getting the video circuit, a Gig E back here to bring the feed back, BT wanted in excess of $300,000 for 4 days. Yes, helping to balance the budget of Great Britain. By the way, also concerning us is the Ryder Cup occurred the week after the Scotland independence vote. So we had some concern as to, yeah, that could have been quite an issue. But so we said, okay, what can we do to get costs down? Well, we've had some gear, technology that we've used from Zixi. CNN has used some stuff from other providers for deep packet recovery. Deep packet recovery is a means of taking your bit stream and encapsulating it and ruggedizing it so it can make it across the internet. There are lots of tricks that are done. I'll avoid getting into what those are. Zixi, who is who we used, did some. Other companies do others. Being a SMPTE presentation, this isn't a sales pitch. I have to be brand agnostic because those are the rules of SMPTE. So 2014 Ryder Cup was produced exclusively using internet camera backhauls from Glen Eagles in Perthshire, Scotland, back to Atlanta. We had 12 feeds that we brought back, so 12 camera feeds. Now, they were rolling. As the players worked their way down the course, what those 12 cameras were changed. Because the Ryder Cup, if you're not familiar with it, is a small group of all-stars from the U.S. and a small group of all-stars from Europe who are competing. So you don't have to cover all the holes at the same time. So you only have a rolling series of 3 holes at a time. So the holes that they were playing, finishing up on, and moving to, those were the ones that were covered. And so they would generally roll through the cameras as they moved. So those 12, it wasn't just 12 cameras covering it, it was many more cameras, but only 12 within a window of about any given half hour. So they were able to roll the cameras as they moved along. And in fact, some of the cameras in the Ryder Cup that are used on the early holes are physically relocated and used on the later holes because they've got an hour or so to move some, and so they can save some money. The feeds were not ours. They were pool feeds provided primarily by the BBC. And complicating all of it, all the feeds were done at 25 frame. So we had 12 feeds from Scotland to Atlanta, 4 return feeds. All feeds were 1080i at 30 megabits per second, 422 10-bit long GOP. So we're not talking about, web streaming quality. This stuff is pure broadcast quality. It looks gorgeous, usable in anybody's broadcast for any purpose. So return feeds are the same quality. Using the internet, why save on bits? All feeds to Atlanta, however, were 25 frames per second. This is the BBC handled pool. So it's Europe, 25 frame. That's the HD way of saying PAL, or what used to be PAL, or the HD legacy of PAL. And feeds were encapsulated. We encapsulated the feeds using Zixi, which is a form of deep packet recovery, which is a means of making it robust so it can survive most of what the internet can throw at it. As I said, there are other folks doing things like it, but the gear we have here is Zixi from various vendors. This is actually a screenshot of, is there a laser in here?
Yep, first one down.
There it is. Folks over here, too bad. This is a screenshot of all 12 of the feeds. This last one here was actually a handheld microwave camera, so therefore at the moment the guy wasn't pointing the stick in the right direction when I captured this. But these are all 12 actual feeds live coming back. And as you can see, even though they look the same, that one's actually a tighter shot than that, so it's a different camera. And these were actually coming back over the internet. And it saved us a lot over using a dedicated gigi. Like I said, prices were all over the place, but BT was asking for $250,000, $300,000 for 4 days of a gigi. By just buying a gigi to BT Tower, which we had to, because that was if you wanted to get out of Gleneagle, Scotland, the only way out of Gleneagle, Scotland was through BT Tower. If you wanted to go from that trailer over there to the trailer next to you via the internet, it went to BT Tower and back. That's just the way British Telecom does things. But it saved us well over 80% on our production costs by using the internet as opposed to having BT bring it back on a dedicated private circuit. So the savings were over $200,000 in savings. The path, I'll give you equal time. The path went from Gleneagles, dedicated gigi to the BT Tower, then off to that good old public internet. Oh, that's right, for the folks on the phone, sorry. Off to the public internet, and that is the plain old generic public internet. People have asked me, okay, so how did the signal get from there back to Atlanta? And my answer is, I have no idea. It's the internet. They hit the internet. We used our standard connectivity that we have from, in this case, I believe we were on the, whose link were we on? I think we were on the Zayo link, because we have a Zayo link coming in and we have a level 3 link coming in. And I believe we were on the Zayo here in Atlanta, here in this campus. That's where the IP address we used was. Back here to Atlanta. So, total payload, 360 megabits, Scotland to Atlanta. 120 megabits, Atlanta to Scotland. In addition, we had communication circuits via a separate internet VPN that was set up. So all the comms, Atlanta dial tone, phones, intercoms, every bit of communications we had of any type between Gleneagles and back here went over the internet. We ordered no phone circuits. I mean, this was just, it was the internet. The internet had gone down. That would have been it. There was no backup. There was no safety net. Yes. Well, it's not FEC. Remember, since you're dealing with a deep packet recovery and packet resends, you don't really have to worry about FEC, because if a packet doesn't make it, it's going to say, send it again. So as long as you haven't left your buffer window, it has time to resend. So you're not worried about the FEC. No. So that, you know, it had time. We ran it with a 2-second buffer, actually 1 second on either end. There was 1 second of buffering on the transmit side, 1 full second of buffering on the receive side. So approximately, 1 second is what it had to say. I didn't get that packet. Please send it again. Get it to me. Not to jump my slides a little bit, but over the course of the 4 days, there was not a single non-recovered dropped packet during the air windows. I say during the air windows, we would come in the morning and have huge numbers of drop packets, but I think they were taking things down and glitching the internet and stuff like that. I mean, we'd have millions of drop packets sometime in the middle of the night. But I have a feeling somebody was like, oh, what's this plug do? Oh, we'll disconnect it. Nobody will know. It's off hours. But during the times we were on the air, not one single unrecovered drop packet for the entire event. It was truly perfect. This is a more detailed look of what the routing was. We had, there it is. We had 2 frames of 6 encoders each. The reason we did this, everything was done redundant except for that GigE internet link. That GigE was it, but everything else was backed up. We had 2 sets of encoders. We actually used 2 Cisco DCM multiplexers. The reason was if we had lost any of our Zixi gear, we could have failed over to the whole other set. So we had total redundancy there. 1 internet pipe, 1 and only, and everything was mirrored and redundant back here in Atlanta. Go to this side. So if we'd lost anything, we could have used the multiplexer and failed over and brought everything back on the other path. We actually did do tests where we using the multiplexer, we routed A to B, B to A, and actually ran double data back. So during a testing window, we were running 700 megabits back over the GigE, and it worked. Obviously, we didn't run that way the full time. One of the things we wanted to do was to see how low we could get the latency. However, due to some BT errors on site, we lost an entire day of setup. And because backing the latency down also meant waiting long periods of time to see if we had any unrecovered drop packets, we ended up not getting to that. We did the stress loading by doubling up on the data rate, and then we said, forget it, we're just going to leave the data rate buffer at 1 second at each end with a 2-second buffer and not bother backing it down. The way the production worked, they were able to get away with that. But one of the things we had wanted to do was to see how low we could get the latency, but we never actually got to that. The announce teams were here. The announcers were here. We did have color in Scotland. They were aware of the latency issues, so they were very careful as to how they did any banter between them. Most of the color commentary was fed back and inserted later. When they did do any kind of back and forth banter, it was strictly via phone IFB, and everybody was told, talk, pause, talk, and they looked really good. They were used to it, and there wasn't that much of it. Satellite latency will be about 1.25 seconds typically. Generally speaking, with normal GOP structures, the encoder to decoder back-to-back has about 1 second of latency. It can have a little bit less, but between 3/4 seconds and 1 second. And then you've got 1/3 second propagation to and from the satellite. So it's a little more than satellite would have been. Originally, we said we were going to see how low we could get it, but like I said, we never got around to that testing, and they said forget about it. It's not a problem. We'll live with it. No, nothing. No, he was asking me, is the latency comparable to satellite? And I was comparing it to satellite. But there was no satellite involved in it. It was all terrestrial fiber on the ground or under the water. In Scotland, that was the truck where we got the feeds from. We had no, like I said, no production there. We simply took cameras from the pool feed, the BBC pool feed. It hit a router. They selected 12 at any one time, routed them through to us on a rolling basis. That's the gear that generated it. Encoders, which were up here, if I'm hitting it, there it is. Encoders that were up there. Zixi down there. DCMs. I will say, in all deference to our fine meal providers tonight at ATEM, the main reason we used the Selenio encoders was the density. We needed lots of channels. We had lots of ATEM, but the density of being able to do more than 6 and the returns. Remember, all returns are in here too. So, it's truly half and half. Yes, we did. We stage and tested here. We had a bit of an issue with not being able to have a big enough internet pipe to truly hit the internet. We actually brought it back, and I'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what's coming up. We actually, to make certain we hit the internet, our return was a Comcast cable modem. Yeah, and that, because the problem is we have a network here, but without really getting into it with the IT guys, if we plug into 2 network connections, how do we know at any given moment we're going over the internet? And it's not just hitting the switch, which normally it would. The switch would see the IP address and go, oh, you need to go over here. It's not going to route to an in-house IP address unless you do creative things to force it. So we figured just a down and dirty way to make darn certain we're hitting the internet was our inbound was a Comcast cable modem, which is actually provisioned for 150 megabit inbound service, which is a tier Comcast, a business tier Comcast offers. But it is a standard off-the-shelf we did for testing for cable modem, purchased at Walmart. The Walmart down over here off of Howell Mill, that's where it was bought. And that's what we did for our testing to make certain we hit the internet. And so we did that. We did testing here, not at full load, but at comparable loads. We did back-to-back testing to bump it up, and we felt quite comfortable with it. You know, the testing worked. Obviously, there was a lot of hand-wringing on my part of going over there and using just one internet pipe, and if the internet didn't work, there was no show. But we've actually been talking about doing something like this for a while, but correct. We have, for several years now, we have used Zixi and ATEM encoders as a backup for Conan. We have a encoder that sits out at stage 15 in Burbank, and we use it as a tertiary backup should we lose our primary and our backup Hibernia pads. Never actually had to take it to air, but we have had it on hot standby because we actually lose either the main or the backup fiber path on a fairly regular basis. So on average, like once every 2 to 3 months. So whenever that happens, we fire up the Zixi and actually have that as a hot standby should we need it. Never had to go to air with it, but we have had it. And it's been, once again, very stable. That's the back of the cases. I mean, it's about what you'd expect. There's our internet connection. That's it. Yeah, that's where BT dropped it off. Goes into an SFP there. Goes into a GigE switch, which we had to bring. They didn't even provide that. BT only took it as far as the SFP. We actually had to bring the switch from Atlanta. Oh, and then they didn't. Actually, it's probably a good thing that Radio Shack hadn't gone bankrupt yet, because we had some stuff that was missing, and so we actually had to send somebody to Tandy, which is the EU equivalent of Radio Shack, to get a few things to make this work. Yeah. There's our, for those of you who know him, there's our sole on-site tech manager, Tom Sahara. He was it. Rather than sending people out there, Tom was it. And we had a great time saying, Tom, you got to do this. Tom is the one who actually had to drive to Tandy to get the adapters. No, he really didn't want to go.
Oh, okay.
The fact that he's salaried and they didn't have to pay him anything extra had everything to do with him having to go over there. But yeah, Tom was it. He was our sole on-site tech support. Really, really, really long days. We had fun with that.
So who took the picture if he was there alone?
That was taken by one of the production crew. He handed him his cell phone and said, "Take a picture." I told Tom I needed pictures, so we took them with his iPhone. There's more shots of the various cabling. Rather low tech, but it got the job done. Okay, transmissions to Atlanta. So it hits the Zixi encapsulation, comes back. We have our 2 inbound, and these are the standalone Zixis, which are software and cards running inside of basically PCs. path to 2 TXs, the 2 RXs. That's it. It's a PC platform. For the standalone unit, it's also incorporated into the product if you purchase it integrated from one of numerous vendors. So it can be incorporated, but for this case, because of the way we did it, we used the standalone. There was no redundancy on the Gig E. Or actually, to be honest, there was no redundancy on the Gig E side in the UK. We actually did have 2 separate IP addresses pointed to here. So once it hit the internet, we actually did have diversity because the main had one IP address, the backup had another IP address. Actually, I think they were even on different providers. I think one of them was on the level 3, and I think one of them was on the Zayo. But that's not until it hit the internet. The link from Scotland to BT Tower was 1 Gig E, period, end of story.
And you then duplicated it there.
Pardon?
Once you got to BT Tower.
Well, then it hit the internet, and then
okay.
It hit the cloud, whatever that is.
But you said you had 2 streams coming back from at that point, or were there 2 streams?
Well, it had 2 IP addresses. So we had 2 IP addresses. One IP address, I believe, I'm not certain. I believe one of the IP addresses was off the Zayo. The other IP address was off the level 3. For the last mile.
But on the Atlanta end, you were getting them concurrently to both IP addresses?
No. So we had the main path was one set of IP addresses. The backup path was another set of IP addresses. Okay. And so transmit, receive. One of these was on Zayo. One of these was on level 3. So we had some redundancy there, but nothing on the UK side. No, because we had 6 and 6 feeds. So 6 of the feeds were coming in on one, 6 of the feeds were coming in on the other. And then if we lost one of them, we were running each of these at approximately 180 megabits on the inbound. We could have, like we did during the test, ramped whatever was working up to 360, and then using the cross-connect on the multiplexer, moved everything over to the other path. And during the testing window, we did run everything on both paths for a period of time just to, push it to the limit and make sure it wouldn't fall over. And it worked. I'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to, at this point, everything's 25. I'll get to the conversion in a bit. And my SMPTE disclaimer, while we use Dixie DPR, many other providers are working on their own product. So therefore, this is not a commercial pitch, so therefore I am SMPTE compliant.
So I'm familiar with, like, Fujitsu has a product that you can use for delivering over the internet. We've been talking about NetInsight has a product. Do you know how this compares to that? Is it the same general idea? FEC, error queue?
Well, the main thing is, the 2 main things are how it gets across the internet. How do you break it up into smaller packets so that it's internet friendly? You all know the issue of the internet. If a packet doesn't get through and it gets rejected, the data rate cuts in half and it tries again. So rather than being a stream, it's various ways of formatting the data so it is internet friendly in small usable chunks. And if a chunk doesn't get through or a packet doesn't get through, saying send it again, I need it. What the sauce is of different companies, I'll let them get into. But different people are working on different variations of the same thing. But remember, the internet is not friendly to big pieces of data. One of the first people to do something, not like this, they don't do live, but one of the earliest companies to do stuff with like Aspera with file transfer, where they take files and make them internet friendly. Aspera is now part of IBM. Michelle Munson sold the company and made many, many millions of dollars. Don't know how many, but everybody's saying a lot. But they were one of the first people to do, once again, they didn't do live, they did files, but along the same line, they were doing files before anybody was doing live streams. Cisco DCM, just a simple mux, nothing fancy, just a way to take the bits and move them around into, between one group to another and between encoders. We didn't do none of the internet provisioning or anything like that was done in the DCM, but that was strictly just a pure, straight mux demux. Back here, we actually received all the feeds twice. We used a TEM encoders. That's actually what we used on air. But we after we converted it back to IP and then back to ASI, just because we had the BNC connectors on the back rather than all the IP. But we converted it back. We actually received all 12 feeds using a TEM. We also received all 12 feeds using Ericsson. And that was my finger slipping. To recap, okay, there we go. The feeds were then brought into our TOC, where we did the standard checks on them. We had many different. Every feed had audio. We had some wild audio feeds mixed in too, because it was totally produced back here. Just another shot of all the cameras coming in. Actually, what this is actually showing is truly all the cameras coming in off of the TEMs, all the cameras coming in off the Ericssons. And once again, the microwave camera was only up when the guy was pointing in exactly the right direction. Back here at Turner Studios, all equipment used for this had to be reconfigured for 25 frame. And most of this gear had never been that way. They had to generate 25 frame sync. They had to drag extra cables across rooms with 25 frame blackburst on it. Had to be careful because some frames had gear that was being used in multiple control rooms. So you just simply couldn't take the reference off the back of the frame because some of the channels were used at 25. So they had to very carefully go through and make sure that everything in the control rooms could work at 25, which they'd never had to do before. But that actually all went very well. This is our talent at Turner Studios down below us here. Once again, the whole room was 25. One of the interesting problems they had was finding monitors here in the U.S. that would work at 25. A lot of their monitors, as soon as they plugged in the 25 frame, wouldn't work. And actually, the monitor that they used behind him here, which they wanted to use, would not work at 25. So we actually they found an inexpensive way to standards convert it back to 30 just so they could hit that monitor. 25. The whole production was done 25. And the reason was, for golf, you need the best standards converter you can get your hands on. Otherwise, that ball disappears. You can convert it using a $200,000 standards converter. Yeah. And the reality is you can use the best standards converter there is, and it's still not good enough. That ball moving and what it has to do to make that ball move and not disappear when it goes in front of a cloud, which it sometimes does. Even the best converter, occasionally, if that cloud is there, sometimes it loses the ball and you don't necessarily see it emerge, and you'll go a couple of frames and magically the ball appears because it loses it in the cloud, and then the motion vector, it thinks it's noise if it's too small. Yeah, right. But that's an issue. I mean, for sports, you need the best converters you can get your hands on, and they're not good enough. You can't use less expensive converters to be fair, as you can for news, but you can't for sports because truly the ball jumps, the ball disappears, things move in weird directions. Oh yeah. Well, let's face it, TV's a sleight of hand trick to begin with. So, yeah, almost everything. Yeah. Well, no, because it's a I don't know if it was a plasma or an LCD, but it's multiple refresh and multiple frames per frame anyway. If this had been an old CRT, yeah, you'd be in big trouble. But on a plasma or an LCD, once it's locked, it's fine. But they did have to convert it back because the monitor they liked, that was just the right one, had problems. A lot of other places they used whatever they found like, I don't know what the numbers were, like 1 out of 3 worked. And so they just found one. They just went through every monitor they had. If this one works, we'll use it. This one works, we'll use it. And there's talent rubbing their nose. Once again, everything done at 25. Everything, the recordings, everything at Turner Studios, without any exception, was done at 25. It was going through their grass, yeah. Yeah, Trinix there, Evert's at NetOps. Routers don't care. Yeah. Control room at 25. Okay, yeah, so there's our Alchemist PHC. That is a $200,000 standards converter. That was our backup, a Shubasuku, which is another very good standards converter. Unfortunately, it didn't work. We've used it before. We've used it on the air, but we hadn't used it in over a year. We powered it up, and we got Sparkleys, reseated the boards, reseated the cards. We had Sparkleys, called the manufacturer, and they said, well, we don't have any spare cards for that. So what was our backup? Okay, have a $100,000, $200,000 main encoder, $90,000 backup encoder. We needed something else just in case. Yes, we ended up with a $1,200 Blackmagic, which actually didn't look all that bad. I wouldn't want to use it for the ball, but that was our backup. Luckily, we didn't need it. But we ended up having to press that into service because the folks from Shubasuku couldn't get us parts in time. But that was our backup. And actually, we did use that for press feeds. We had some press feeds that we had to bring in and turn around in time windows separate from the main broadcast. And for actually, reality was for talking heads, it looked pretty doggone good. Yeah, the ball tended to do this, and you hit the cloud, and then you didn't see it till it hit the ground. But yeah. Shubasuku, a.k.a. What was it? We have another name. Asaka, yeah. And they are still making standards converters, and they're good standards converters. I mean, I'm not saying anything nasty about them. We've had that one a long time. It just had a problem, and they didn't have parts readily available. Our fault for not checking it out a week prior. If we'd given them another week, they'd have been able to come up with parts. So I'm not picking on them at all. So there's just a shot of Ryder Cup. Now, the best thing about this is that the internet is free. Well, not really. For those of you not familiar with the internet, there are charges for using the internet. And a lot of people say, well, is the internet really free? And the answer is, for large amounts of data, no. However, and this is actually very interesting, you have what's called peering agreements, where where company A has to make an agreement with company B, and there's charges for moving data from your network to my network. Because the reality is there really is no such thing as the internet. There's a whole bunch of different private providers that move data from point A to point B to point C and go through switches. And taken as a whole, that's the internet. But each and every one of those steps is a private provider, and in some way, shape, or form, they have to make money. And somebody has to pay the bills somehow. So as you make connections, there are peering agreements, which have charges often associated with them. You also pay for transit. When you buy an internet connection, you actually pay for the bits that you use. Now, what's interesting is you think, well, there it goes. Forget it. If you got to pay for the bits you use, it's going to cost too much. Well, something interesting has happened. This is an average of wholesale transit costs. Now, nobody in here is going to necessarily get this rate, but if you work really hard, you can come close. You will notice back in 1998, and this is for 1 megabit per second per month. So if I wanted to have a 1 megabit transmit over the internet, 1 megabit, when I left it up, actually not 24/7, it's up 95% of the time. 95 percentile measuring is how everything in the internet works. So for 95% usage, in 1998, you would have paid $1,200 to move a megabit across the internet 24/7. In 2014, that would be down to 94 cents for 1 megabit per second, 24/7 for the entire month. It's expected that this year, the average is going to drop to 63 cents. So if you had a gig E, and we use 1,000, never mind the 1024, let's use nice round numbers. So if you were trying to transmit this year a gig E, one direction, it's per bit, so if you go two directions, it's twice as much. A gig E, 24/7, full out, you'd be paying $630 a month wholesale rate anywhere within the U.S. And that's for U.S. transport. International rates can be higher. Rates can usually aren't lower. They can be lower in some places up in the Scandinavian countries, but that's a U.S. price. Transatlantic can be a bit more. So bottom line, if you're using a gigabit 24/7, 365, the transfer cost would be $630 per month. Just a little piece of curiosity, though. It just works out quite well that if you look at the 94-cent number, let's round it off to $1, at a megabit per second, that comes out to about 340 gigabytes in a month, which happens to be almost exactly your anyone who has a Comcast cap. Comcast caps at 350 gigabytes. So what is the wholesale rate of that 350 gigabytes? $1.
Was BT?
BT provided the first mile. They took it as far as BT Tower. Then there's the transit costs that we were rolled into the BT price. How it came across the Atlantic, I have no idea. We could have done a trace route and traced back various, MAC addresses and stuff. We have no idea. How it came across the Atlantic, I have no idea. But at some point, it hit level 3 in Zayo, and that's how it came into here. The transatlantic cost was paid by the transit fees that were buried in our price that we paid to, well, in part, is buried in our price we paid to BT, and in part paid to the price that we paid to Zayo and level 3.
Rick, I don't know if you're coming up to this. I don't want to give a slide that's in the future. Do you have a comparison of what you think it would have cost doing it traditional versus what it really cost? How much did you save?
Well, let's put it this way. Just on the BT alone, using the internet versus, using a dedicated path, the path we would have been required at, I'll call it gunpoint, to purchase from BT, because if you want to build a path out, you had to buy it through them. That was the only way you could buy it. Versus using the internet and still paying BT an outrageous amount of money, it saved us $200,000 using the internet. Now, that's not real world pricing. That's highway robbery pricing, but that's the way it works.
And you also had other savings just because you didn't have to have a huge crew on site.
100 people. We saved sending 100 people to site. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So when you're purchasing your internet, of that money, everybody's paying for their internet, assuming a 350 gig cap is less on some providers, but Comcast is 350. $1 of that is paying for the.
I don't know how you got that, Rick. Let me get back.
Please stand by.
Whoops.
To recap, it goes to the internet, goes across from Scotland to Atlanta, goes through, that's the routing from Scotland side. Scotland, we had one truck. Tom Sahara. Where's Tom? There's Tom. All right. Yeah, some of these have transitions. I got away from the game. Transmission to Atlanta. There's the Zixi path. You use Zixi DPR. Other people provide it. Then we hit the Cisco as Ericsson and TEM coming in. You can use either both of them. There they are. There's our engineers, and I hate these fades. I can't speed them up. There's studio, 25 frames. Announcer rubbing his nose. Yes, thank you very much. Coming in. Yes, we used standards converters. Yes, even the cheap $1,000 one. And Ryder Cup. Internet is free. Well, not really. And peering agreements, transit costs, and there's the chart. Okay.
Rick, I'm dying to know. So how much
Okay.
did you pay BT? $50,000? $100,000?
Yeah, 50.
50?
Or that might be an estimate since I can't bring up prices at SMPTE events. Yeah.
Wait a minute, we have Title II now. Never mind.
Yeah.
I retract that.
Yeah.
What were your final platforms?
The final platform was we handed off a feed. It was encapsulated for the internet, handed off to, I believe, Ackermans, at multiple tiers and multiple levels. When we looked at it here, it looked really good. If you go full screen, I think 720p30 was what they actually streamed it at.
Anything for Roku, Apple TV, anything like that?
Well, actually, since it was, I believe there were links through from I believe you could link to it from PGA.com, which is available on Roku. So yeah, there were other customized platforms that were streamed to. So yes, from PGA.com you can link to it. So if you had a Roku, you would have got to it through the PGA site.
Hi, Rick. Two questions. First of all, Sports Central, I assume then you had some of the EVSs running at 25 frames rather than their normal.
Mm-hmm.
And also, too, about the protocol, obviously you said you could do packet resend, so you were obviously TCP/IP rather than UDP?
Yes.
And also, too, did you have like...
Actually, let me phrase it. I believe so. I'm not certain.
Uh-huh. And did you have like store and forward points along the way? Because
no,
the buffer size for 2 seconds to send all the way from Scotland back to here, that's a whole lot of buffering. I mean,
no, not really. Fiber's quick. Light moves quickly, even at 93% the speed of light, which is what you go through with a piece of glass.
Rick, if you were using ARQ, you were probably then using UDP. I think you mentioned that you were doing packets would be resent if they didn't make it, which would probably be ARQ.
You're probably right. Okay, you found the section I didn't research.
For those of you wondering why we're worried about the microphone, the people streaming at home need to hear it through the system.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Rick, you just explained this, and you said you use a system similar to this to back up Conan.
Yes.
Is there anything coming in the future, other sporting events, that you're going to use something similar to this?
It's strictly a matter of where we can, where we need to. One of the things we find domestically is the cost of using a dedicated domestic service like a Level 3, a Hibernia, a Zayo, is actually pretty doggone good. So getting bits from within the U.S. from point A to point B via private carrier is usually not a problem because we usually don't come out of venues where we don't have access to private carriers yet have access to big internet. So this is more likely to be useful coming out of unusual places, possibly a college campus or something like that. But like I said, the vast majority of what we do here at Turner is basketball. And those venues generally have at least one of the dedicated transport providers in them. So, we'll use it when we need to use it and when we can use it. We love the technology, but most of the time we can get a private provider, and the rates they charge us are really good. But other people, especially in the news business, on the other hand, where you're coming out of strange places, there's a lot of usage for this. We have actually used this a couple of times as a return, as a net return.
This does seem, it just sounds of interest to where you'd go. You mentioned news. We were having to go, I know news, you may go to a college campus, places where you can find the internet already there at a good enough speed, or even thinking ahead, stadiums putting in this equipment so that people coming to do baseball games, football games, whatever, might want to use public.
Well, there's that, and the other issue too is, normally we use ASI, not because we're sold on ASI, but because we go into the venue and there's a round connector there. As I say, round connector, square connector for IP, I don't really care. It's whoever gets the bits from point A to point B reliably and at a good price. In the future, it's going to transition and all be IP. Now, whether it's hard provisioned IP, where you don't need to deal with the deep packet recovery because the transport provider, has full QoS on it and the bits will go through with low latency, or whether you're dealing with the public internet, which is obviously not QoS by any stretch of the imagination, and you have to do every trick in the book to make it work.
Business question for you. This ended up being a streaming service because you didn't have the real broadcast rights. That was somebody else.
Yeah.
Was there a bit of a relaxed flavor? Apparently not engineering-wise, but from a business perspective, would you try this on a real World Series, Olympics?
I would be more willing to do for most of the stuff on TNT, TBS, we do nothing without a backup. We do redundancy on everything. I certainly wouldn't have a problem using this as a backup. Now, backup mean,
How about for primary? That's the goal.
Well, normally what we do is we do path A, path B, and whichever one is better at a given time is what we use. So it is unlikely, just due to latency issues, that this would be the primary, unless, of course, the other path was taking hits and dropouts and wasn't stable. Then we use the other.
Your quality experience here was excellent.
Yes.
I think you were even a bit of a white knuckler going into this thing, right?
Yeah.
And the fact it was only streaming at the other end, although nobody admit to this, might have given you a little bit of a pushback.
Well, it's safe to say we would not have done our first event IP internet only if it was on TBS or TNT. Well, once again, like I said, for TBS and TNT, we back up everything. So, so beyond using it, then it's a matter of, we'd have to have another path. I mean, we don't do any stuff on TBS or TNT that doesn't have a backup. But would this be one of the two paths? Yeah, very well could be. I think a lot of people wouldn't have any problem using this as one of the two paths. Keep in mind, normally one of our paths is satellite because we have concerns that one person with a backhoe can take out every fiber provider coming out of an arena. Because very often there is one path out of that arena, and you can have 4 different providers and the internet, and one backhoe is going to take them all out. So that's why we normally will do one fiber, one satellite. Now, if we get into a situation where we're doing the production back here and having to bring back many, 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 many cameras, where you're doing that over satellite just isn't a viable option, then I think the possibility of internet with deep packet recovery being one of the paths is very high.
One of the people who's streaming wants to thank you. A couple of them want to thank you for the quick recap. Since they came in a little bit late, but I guess it was audible enough.
Yes.
Were you using any encryption during this when you sent it over the public internet?
This case, no, but we could have. We actually had encryption in the encoders. We just didn't turn it on. We figured this thing is not. You probably couldn't hack this. I think hacking this would give the NSA fits because this thing's going out and it's taking different paths and around. I mean, they'd probably be calling us and going, "Can you feed it a different way? This is driving us crazy."
Any other questions?
Yeah, just to follow up, kind of clarify something. You said in the beginning, you said something cost that BT quoted $300,000 to you to do something.
Yeah,
something actually cost 50, and I lost them.
To purchase a dedicated Gig E back to Atlanta from Perthshire through BT, they gave us a quote of $250,000. Any other questions? Thank you very much.